I came this close to walking away from the most important thing that ever happened to me. And I want to sit with that for a moment before I say anything else. Before I build any kind of narrative around it or find the lesson in it or do the thing that we do with painful truths, which is move through them quickly toward the part where everything makes sense, I want to just sit with the rawness of that sentence. I almost let her go, not because I didn't love her. That is the part that is hardest to explain and most important to understand. Not because the love wasn't real or wasn't enough or had faded into something too thin to hold the weight of a life together. The love was completely real. The love was, if anything, the problem. Because loving someone that fully, that specifically, that without the comfortable distance of half commitment, is one of the most terrifying things a human being can do. And I was afraid. That is the honest answer. Not incompatibility, not timing, not the external circumstances that I told myself were the reason and that were real, but were not the actual reason. Fear. I was afraid of what it meant to be that seen, afraid of what it meant to need someone that specifically, afraid of what it would cost me if I let it be as real as it actually was and then lost it. Afraid of the version of myself that existed in her presence, the open version, the one that had stopped performing and started actually being because that version had no armor, and armor had kept me safe for a very long time, and I wasn't sure I remembered how to be safe without it. And so I started pulling back, not dramatically, not in the way that announces itself, not with a conversation or a declaration or any of the clear signals that would have given her something to respond to, in the quiet way. The way that is harder to name and therefore harder to address. The gradual way, the increasing distance that looked from the outside like busyness or distraction or the natural settling of early intensity into something more sustainable. But it wasn't settling, it was retreat. And she felt it. Of course she felt it. The people who love us most are the most sensitive to our withdrawals, precisely because they have been paying the closest attention. They know the difference between the version of us that is fully present and the version that is there in body and somewhere else entirely in every way that matters. They feel the door closing even when it closes slowly, even when it closes quietly, even when the person closing it is doing everything they can to make the closing look like something else. She felt it, and she didn't chase me. This is the part I want to tell you about. This is the part where everything changed, where I came so close to losing the most important thing, and instead, in the most unexpected way, found the deepest version of it. She didn't chase me. She didn't do the thing that fear wants the other person to do, which is pursue you harder, love you louder, prove themselves more urgently, give you the external reassurance that temporarily quiets the internal noise. She didn't make herself smaller to fit the space I was leaving for her. She didn't rearrange her needs to accommodate my retreat. She didn't pretend not to notice what was happening and hope that if she was patient enough and understanding enough and didn't ask for too much, I would eventually find my way back. She did something that I was completely unprepared for. She got still. She got completely, quietly, devastatingly still. And in that stillness, she said something to me, not in those words, but she said it clearly. She said, I see what you are doing. I understand what it comes from. I am not going to participate in it. And I am not going to wait indefinitely for you to decide whether I am worth the risk of being fully present for. I love you. And I respect myself. And those two things are not in conflict. And you need to decide with full information and full seriousness whether you are in this or you are not. Because I am, completely. And I deserve someone who is completely too. She didn't say it to punish me. She didn't say it to manipulate me into coming back. She said it because it was true. Because she had done enough work on herself to know the difference between loving someone and losing herself in the loving. Because she understood, with a clarity I didn't yet have about myself, that love that requires you to abandon your own dignity is not love. It is something else. Something that feels like love and costs like love and is not love. And that stillness, that clear, quiet, completely dignified stillness, cracked me open. Not immediately. I want to be honest about the timeline because I think we lie about the timeline of important realizations, and the lying does a disservice to people who are waiting for the sudden clarity that doesn't come. It didn't happen in a moment of cinematic revelation. It happened slowly over days, in the accumulation of the specific and particular absence of her the way she had been when she was fully present. In the realization that the distance I had created was not relieving the fear the way I had calculated it would. It was making it worse. The distance was not protecting me from the potential loss of her. It was creating the actual loss of her. In real time, by my own hand. I was doing the thing I was most afraid of. I was losing her. And I was the one doing it. That realization. That specific no escape, nowhere to put it realization. That the enemy was not the risk of love. The enemy was the fear of it. That the thing I was protecting myself from was not as dangerous as the protecting myself from. That the armor I had worn for so long to keep from being hurt was actively, in this moment, creating the hurt I had spent years trying to avoid. I sat with that for a long time. I sat with it in a way you sit with things that are going to require you to change. Not comfortably, not with the peaceful equanimity of someone who has accepted the truth and is ready to act on it. With the specific discomfort of a person who can see the truth clearly and knows what it is asking of them and is not yet sure they are capable of giving it. It was asking me to be afraid and stay anyway. It was asking me to let the armor come off not when I felt safe enough to take it off, but right now while everything felt dangerous. It was asking me to choose presence over protection in the moment when protection felt most necessary. It was asking me to trust without guarantee, without the safety of knowing how it would end, that the real thing was worth more than the safe distance, and I was not sure I could do it. This is the part I need to tell you about because I think it is the part that gets left out of the stories we tell about love and courage and the moments that change us. The part before the decision, the long uncomfortable stay in the not knowing, the sitting with the question without the answer, the being in the fear without the resolution of it. I was not sure I could do it, and I did it anyway. Not because the fear went away, it didn't go away. Not because I suddenly felt certain. The certainty did not precede the action. I did it while the fear was still fully present, while the uncertainty was still real, while every protective instinct I had developed over decades was telling me that this was dangerous and I should stay back and the distance was safer. I went toward her anyway. I went toward her with the fear in my hands, visible, not hidden, not managed into something more presentable. And I said the true thing, the real thing, the thing I had been keeping behind the armor because it was the most vulnerable thing I had ever said to another person. I said I have been afraid, not of you, of this, of how real this is, of how much I need you specifically, which is terrifying to me, which has always been terrifying to me, because I have not always been able to trust that the things I need most will stay. And my response to that fear has been to create the distance that makes losing you less catastrophic. Except I was wrong about the math. The distance doesn't make losing you less catastrophic. The distance is losing you, and I would rather be fully in this and risk the loss than be safely distant from the most important thing in my life. I said that out loud, without the armor. And what happened next is the thing I came here to tell you about. What happened next is the thing that changed me. She was quiet for a moment, and in that quiet I felt everything. The years of armor, the specific weight of every time I had chosen protection over presence, the faces of every person I had kept at a careful distance while believing the distance was wisdom, the accumulated cost of a life spent managing the risk of love rather than living it. All of that passed through me in the silence, and then she said something that I've returned to every day since. Something that I want to give to you today because I think it might be the most important thing I have to offer. More important than anything I could tell you about my own story, or my own journey, or the particular contours of what I learned. She said, I know, I have always known. I was waiting for you to know it too. I was waiting for you to know it too. She had seen the fear from the beginning. She had understood it in the way that people with a deep capacity for love understand the fears of the people they love, which is completely and without judgment and without the need to fix it, or rush it, or make it smaller than it was. She had seen it and loved me in it and waited, not passively, not without cost to herself, but genuinely waited because she believed that the person underneath the fear was worth waiting for. And she was clear about her limit. She was clear that the waiting had an end, that she respected herself too much to wait indefinitely. That love without self respect is not a gift to the person you love. It is a slow erosion of the very thing that made them love you. She held both things simultaneously, the love and the limit, the patience and the dignity, the willingness to wait and the absolute clarity about what she would not do, which was disappear into the waiting. That is the thing I want to talk about today, because this story is not really about me. It is about her, about what she knew and how she held it and what it took to hold it without collapsing either into pursuit or into premature departure. It is about the specific and extraordinary courage of a woman who knew her worth in the presence of someone who was struggling to be fully present to it. And it is about what that courage made possible. Because here's what I know now that I didn't know then. Her stillness was not passive. Her stillness was the most active thing in the room. While I was retreating, while I was managing my distance, while I was doing the complicated internal calculus of fear and self protection, she was doing something that required more courage than anything I was doing. She was holding her ground. She was standing in the full truth of what she felt and what she deserved and what she deserved and what she would and would not accept. And she was not moving from it. Not for the temporary relief of chasing someone who was pulling away, not for the short term soothing of making herself smaller so the dynamic would feel less threatening. She stood in her full self, and that full self, that immovable, dignified, loving full self, was what finally made it possible for me to come back. Because here is the truth about love that I did not understand before this. The truth that I had to almost lose everything to learn. You cannot love someone into presence. You cannot chase someone into commitment. You cannot make yourself irresistible enough or accommodating enough or understanding enough to pull someone across the threshold of their own fear. The only thing that can bring a person across that threshold is the person themselves making the decision to cross it. What you can do, what she did, what was the most generous and most courageous act of love I have ever witnessed, is stand on the other side of the threshold and be so completely and undeniably yourself that the person standing in the doorway can see clearly what they are choosing between. Not you versus their fear. The full life versus the half life. The real thing versus the safe distance. Presence versus protection. She made that choice visible by being so fully present herself that my absence from full presence became impossible to rationalize. She held the mirror up not by telling me what I was doing, but by being so clearly, completely, unashamedly alive in her own love and her own worth and her own dignity, that the managed, armored, half-present version of me looked even to myself like exactly what it was. A waste of her, a waste of this, a waste of the life that was right there being offered at full volume by someone who had done the work to know herself and to love without losing herself and to wait without waiting forever. I saw it, finally, fully, with nowhere to hide from it. And I crossed the threshold. I want to talk about what happened after, because the crossing of the threshold is not the end of the story. I think we sometimes tell love stories as if the moment of decision, the grand gesture or the honest confession, or the finally saying the true thing is where the story concludes. The credits roll. The hard part is over. The rest is just living. The rest is where the real work is. Coming back from the retreat, from the distance I had created, required more of me than I expected. Not because she made it difficult. She didn't make it difficult. She received the coming back with a generosity that still moves me when I think about it. The generosity of someone who had been hurt by the distance but did not use that hurt as a weapon, who had the right to make me earn the return and chose instead to simply receive it the way you receive someone who has found their way home after being lost. What was difficult was the internal work, learning to stay when the fear came back, because it came back. Not as strongly, not with the same power it had before the threshold crossing, before the conversation, before the moment of full honesty. But it came back, in smaller forms, in specific moments. in the particular vulnerability of being deeply known by someone who could leave. And every time it came back, I had to make the decision again. Stay, be here, be present. Let it be as real as it is. Don't reach for the distance. Don't start the quiet retreat. Don't manage this into something safer. Stay. And I want to tell you something about the staying. Every time I chose to says, Tay. Every time I felt the pull toward the familiar armor and chose presence instead. Every time I was afraid and moved toward her rather than away from her. Something shifted, not dramatically, not in a way I could measure on a single occasion, but cumulatively in the accumulation of small decisions all going the same direction. Something in me that had been braced for so long began to release, some ancient holding, some grip I had maintained for decades on the part of myself that I was most afraid to lose, began to relax. And what I found when it released was not the disaster I had been protecting against. What I found was more of myself. The parts that had been bound up in the protecting, the parts that had been occupied by the maintenance of the armor, the attention and the energy and the capacity for feeling that had been allocated to the management of distance, all of that came free and went toward her and toward the life. And I want to tell you what that life feels like from the inside. Not to make you wish for it or to describe something that is available only to specific people under specific circumstances, but to tell you what is on the other side of the threshold. What is possible when two people have each done the work, when one person stands in their full worth and the other crosses into full presence and they meet each other there. It feels like the altitude I described at the beginning, like being high enough above the noise to see the shape of things, like the specific quiet of having nothing to manage, no gap between who you are presenting yourself to be and who you actually are, no distance between what you feel and what you express, no armor to maintain and no retreat to plan and no calculation running in the background assessing the risk of the current level of openness. Just this, just here. Just the extraordinary, ordinary reality of being fully alive with another person who is also fully alive. It feels like home, not the word home. The actual thing, the thing the word is trying to describe and never quite captures. The physical sensation of having arrived somewhere that is specifically yours, that fits, that does not require adjustment, where you can put down what you have been carrying and it is safe to put it down. That is what is on the other side of the threshold. And I almost didn't cross it. I want to close with what this story is really about, because I have been telling it as my story, as the story of a man who almost let fear destroy the most important thing in his life and found his way back. And it is that story. That is all true. But the real story, the one I want you carry, is her story. The story of a woman who knew her worth when someone she loved was struggling to be fully present to it, who held her ground when the easier thing would have been to chase or to collapse or to make herself more convenient, who loved fully and protected herself simultaneously without those two things being in conflict, who was patient without being passive, who waited without waiting forever, who held the love and the limit in the same hands without dropping either one. That is the story. And I want to say something to the women who are in a version of this right now, who are standing in the doorway of their own version of this dynamic, who are giving their full selves to someone who is giving them the managed version, who are feeling the distance that is dressed up as busyness or independence or not being ready, who are wondering whether to chase or to stay or to stay or to go, who are asking themselves whether the love they feel is worth the cost of what it is currently asking from them. Your worth is not negotiable. Your dignity is not the price of admission to love. Your full self is not an ability that needs to be hidden until someone has decided they can handle it. You do not need to make yourself smaller so that someone else's fear is more comfortable. You do not need to chase someone across the distance they have created. That is not your job. That is not love. That is the specific kind of self-abandonment that looks like devotion and costs you everything. What you can do, the most powerful thing you can do, the thing that is both the most loving and the most self-respecting option available to you, is exactly what she did. Stand in your full self. Be so completely, undeniably, unapologetically yourself. that the choice becomes visible. Not you versus their fear, the full life versus the half life. And then let them choose. With full information, with the full visibility of what they are choosing between. And if they choose the fear, if they choose the distance, if they choose the half life, let them go. Not with bitterness, not with the story that you are not enough, because you are not. You are more than enough. You are everything, but you are not. You are everything, but you cannot love someone across the threshold of their own fear. That crossing is theirs to do, and you deserve someone who has crossed it. I crossed it because of her, because she stood in her full self and made the choice visible and waited long enough for me to see it clearly and not one moment longer. And every day of the life we are building on the other side of that threshold, I understand more completely what I almost let go. And I am grateful. Not in the easy, comfortable, it all worked out way. In the specific earned, I know what this cost and I will not waste it way. Grateful in the way you are only grateful for the things you almost lost. The things you had to fight yourself to keep. The things that required you to become more than you were. She is that. She will always be Tell, Hat, and I came this close to walking away. I didn't, and that is everything.